The prairie was quiet that evening, so quiet that a man could hear his own heart if he listened long enough. Wind moved through the tall grass in lazy waves, like a mother's hand brushing the hair of a sleeping child. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk turned slow circles above a dying sun, and the sound of a far-off creek folded into the stillness of the land. That's how evenings came in Red Mesa. Soft, endless, honest. And that's how they found him, the rancher. He was a man who spoke little and remembered too much. His hands were worn into the shape of labor, his eyes into the shape of loss. Folks in town said he'd once had a wife, but the desert took her during the winter sickness years ago. After that, he stopped going to church, stopped playing cards, stopped looking folks in the eye. He lived half a day's ride from town, alone, on a piece of land most men wouldn't bother claiming. Too rocky for crops, too dry for cattle. But he liked it that way. He said the land didn't talk unless it had something worth saying. Each morning he rose before dawn, made coffee over a small iron stove, and sat on his porch until the horizon turned gold. He'd feed the horses, fix the fences, walk the lines of his land with the slow patience of someone who knew every inch of it. His boots were always dusted, his hat always pulled low, and when he rode into town once a month for supplies, people greeted him with nods instead of words. They called him the Quiet One. He never corrected them. That afternoon, clouds gathered, the kind that made the air smell of rain and memory. He was mending a broken rail near the south fence when he heard it. A sound too strange to belong to the wind. A faint cry, thin, high, carried by the river. At first he thought it might have been an animal caught in the reeds. But then he heard it again, a child's scream, torn apart by the current. Without a thought, he ran. His boots pounded the dirt. The smell of wet sage filled the air as he reached the river bend. There, caught between the angry waters, two boys struggled against the pole. One was maybe 10, the other no more than 8, their small arms thrashing against the river's fury. The rancher didn't stop to think. He threw off his coat and duff. The water hit him like a wall. Cold, merciless. It swallowed him whole. He kicked hard, pushing through the mud and foam, the roar of the current filling his ears. The older boy was slipping beneath the surface. The younger clung to a branch, crying for help that vanished in the thunder of the river. The rancher reached the younger first, lifting him onto a patch of grass by the bank. Then he went back for the other, the one who had already disappeared beneath the swirl. He dove once. Nothing. Twice. Nothing. On the third dive, his hand brushed cloth. He grabbed, pulled, broke the surface with a gasp that burned his chest raw. He dragged the boy onto the shore and fell beside him, both of them coughing river water into the mud. The sky broke open then, rain pouring in silver sheets, thunder rolling over the valley like drums of war. He carried both boys back to his cabin, one in each arm, their bodies limp with exhaustion. Inside, he lit the lantern and laid them near the fire. The younger one was breathing, shivering, eyes wide with shock. The older one coughed hard until he threw up water, then breathed again, sharp and desperate. The rancher wrapped them in blankets, fed the fire, and waited. For a long time, the only sounds were the crackle of wood and the soft breaths of survival. The rain drummed on the roof, and outside, the wind sang through the cracks like a hymn for the living. When the boys finally opened their eyes, they stared at him, not with fear, but with something deeper. Recognition. Maybe they didn't share his language, but gratitude didn't need words. He gave them warm broth from the pot, tore bread into pieces, and gestured for them to eat. They obeyed, quiet, trembling, eyes darting to the window as if afraid the river might come for them again. Hours passed. The storm softened into a whisper. The world outside turned black except for the soft glow leaking from the cabin windows. The boys had fallen asleep on his old wool blankets, their small hands clutching each other even in dreams. He sat across from them, elbows on knees, staring into the fire. There was something strange about them, not strange like danger, but strange like mystery. Their faces, their braids, their clothes woven from soft animal hide. They weren't settlers' children. They were from the people who lived beyond the ridge. the ones the townsfolk called savages. But the rancher didn't believe in that word. He'd seen too much to think any man born of this land was less than another. Still, he knew what this could mean. If their family found them here, in a white man's cabin, there could be trouble. He'd seen what happened when the two worlds crossed paths. Nothing but blood and blame. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. The firelight painted his face in flickers of amber and shadow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, and that frightened him more than anything. Outside, coyotes began to howl. Their cries rose from the hills like ghosts calling each other home. He went to the window, pulled back the curtain. The rain had stopped, and the prairie shimmered under the moonlight, wide, endless, and silent again. But somewhere out there, beyond the ridges, he felt eyes watching. Maybe a mother's. Maybe something older. He didn't know it yet, but the land had already shifted. By saving those boys, he had changed the story written in its dust. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed, low and mournful. He whispered to himself, almost a prayer, "Whatever comes next, let it come." Then he sat by the fire, rifle within reach, and closed his eyes. The boys slept soundly, the storm gone, the world breathing in slow rhythm again. But the prairie never sleeps for long. Before dawn, when even the stars had grown tired of shining, the earth began to tremble with the sound of hooves. Hundreds of them, moving as one, coming closer. The rancher's eyes opened. He looked toward the horizon and saw the faint glow of torches flickering through the mist. Night fell heavy over Red Mesa, the kind of night that pressed close to the skin, whispering things too old to be remembered. The rain had gone, leaving behind a silver hush, the kind that makes every sound louder. A coyote barked once, then silence. But beneath that silence, something moved, something vast. The rancher felt it before he heard it. A vibration beneath the floorboards. A rhythm, low, steady, like thunder trapped inside the earth. He stepped outside, rifle in hand. The air was cool, full of the smell of wet sage and smoke. And then he saw it. On the far ridge, a shimmer of torchlight. 1, then 10, then 100. They weren't stars. They were riders. The sound grew, hoofbeats rolling like waves across the prairie. The earth itself seemed to breathe with them. The rancher's horse snorted, uneasy. The boys, still inside the cabin, stirred in their sleep. He didn't move, didn't shout, didn't hide. He stood in front of the cabin, the river's reflection flickering at his back, and watched as the riders drew near. The moonlight caught the edges of their spears, their feathers, the gleam of paint across their faces. They rode with a grace that belonged to the land itself. Not men upon horses, but shadows upon wind. And at their head rode her. She was not what he expected. Tall, still, wrapped in deep blue and silver, her hair braided with beads that caught the light like drops of rain. Her face was carved from both strength and sorrow, her eyes holding a storm older than the river. When she dismounted, the riders behind her halted, silent, waiting for her breath, her gesture. The rancher could feel the tension in the air, thick as summer heat. Every man in her company could kill him where he stood. And yet, none moved. The woman stepped forward. The boys woke then, startled cries echoing through the small cabin. They rushed outside before the rancher could stop them. The moment the woman saw them, her face changed. All the power in her posture melted into something softer, something sacred. She ran to them, gathering them both into her arms, clutching them to her chest as if to prove they were real. The younger one cried into her shoulder. The older simply held her and closed his eyes. The warriors shifted in their saddles, murmuring low words in a language the rancher didn't know. But he didn't need to understand. The sound carried both relief and disbelief. She turned then, still holding her sons, and looked at him. The world seemed to pause between them. In her eyes, he saw gratitude and grief. Not the polite gratitude of townfolk, but the raw, soul-deep kind, born from fear, loss, and love too vast for words. She said something in her tongue. The rancher shook his head slowly. "I don't know your words," he murmured, voice barely a breath. She seemed to understand anyway. Her lips trembled into a small nod. Then she gestured. Two of her warriors approached, one holding a long piece of cloth marked with symbols in red and white. They laid it at his feet. A gift, a sign of respect. But behind them, another man spoke sharply, his tone bitter, his eyes hard. He pointed toward the ranch, then toward the sky, then spat into the dirt. The rancher could feel the change immediately. The tension thickened, sharp as a blade drawn in silence. Anger flickered among them like wildfire. The woman turned, fire flashing in her gaze, and spoke with command that could break stone. Her voice rose, low, melodic, dangerous. The men quieted. Even the wind seemed to listen. When the storm of voices faded, she looked back at the rancher again, her expression softer now, though her eyes still glimmered with something unspoken. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the lines of fatigue on her face, the faint scars near her temple, the mud on her boots from the riverbank. She reached out, touched his arm once gently, a touch not of ownership, nor flirtation, but recognition. The kind one human gives another when the world reminds them both of how fragile life is. She said something again, short, rhythmic, her voice falling like wind through reeds. Then she pressed her hand to her chest and to her son's. The rancher nodded. He understood enough. Thank you. The air between them was alive, a quiet that hummed with shared survival, shared breath, shared loss. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the river itself had brought them together, washing away the lines that men drew between us and them. But peace in the west was never more than a guest. One of her warriors rode forward, face twisted with rage. He shouted something, pointing to the hills, toward the town beyond. Another joined him. Their voices grew sharp, angry, filled with memory of burned camps, of dead brothers. The rancher didn't understand the words, but he knew what vengeance looked like. The woman turned, and in that turn, she became something fierce and holy. She raised her hand, shouted once. The sound was not of anger. It was command, ancient and final. 100 warriors lowered their weapons in silence. The rancher saw the respect they had for her, not because she was their leader, but because she was their heart. Rain began again, soft and cold, the kind that carried no thunder, only healing. The flames of the torches hissed and smoked. The woman stood there, her sons clinging to her legs, and looked at the rancher for what felt like forever. Then she spoke again, a few words, her voice quiet as a prayer. He caught only one he recognized from the few things traders sometimes said about her people. Water, she said, and then she touched the boys' heads, then the earth, then her heart. He understood. The river had taken much from her people. Tonight, it gave something back. Before dawn, she signaled to her riders. They began to move, melting into the mist like ghosts returning to the stories they came from. The last thing the rancher saw was her silhouette on horseback, a dark shape against the pale horizon. She turned her head once, met his eyes through the rain, and for the briefest moment, she smiled. Not a smile of joy, but of understanding, a promise unspoken. Our paths will cross again. When she was gone, the rancher stood alone in the quiet. The fire inside his cabin had burned low, but the warmth of her presence still lingered in the air. He looked down at the cloth they had left. Soft deer hide, painted with symbols he could not read. Circles, lines, a river, and two small hands pressed in red paint, children's hands. He brushed his thumb over the prints. They were dry now, but they felt alive. He hung the cloth above the fireplace, and for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer. Not to God, not to man, but to the river, that cruel, merciful thing that had carried death and deliverance in the same breath. Morning broke with a gold light that spread slowly over the plains. The prairie looked almost peaceful again, but peace in red Mason never lasted long. The townsfolk would soon hear whispers, about 100 riders seen in the night, about torches burning on a ridge, about a rancher who stood unarmed before them and lived to tell it. They would call him lucky. They would call him foolish. They would never understand that something larger than luck had crossed his land that night. He went inside, poured himself coffee from the blackened pot. and stared at the two small blankets near the hearth. The boys were gone, but the warmth of where they had slept still lingered. He sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the prairie grass like a soft voice calling a name he didn't yet know. And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, a woman rode home with her sons, and a heart she had not expected to find again. Days passed like slow-moving clouds, the kind that drift without direction but never truly stop. The river calmed. The prairie returned to its old rhythm. Wind through the sage, coyotes at dusk, and the rancher walking the fences alone again. Yet the silence had changed. It no longer comforted him. It followed him like a ghost with kind eyes. Sometimes he caught himself turning toward the ridge at sunset, expecting to see torches again or the shimmer of a braid catching the light. But there was only the wind, whispering things the heart could not quite forget. The rancher's days were filled with habit. He fixed what was broken. He rode to town once a week for supplies. He mended his saddle and kept his rifle clean. But somewhere between the rising and the setting of the sun, his world had grown softer. He found himself leaving scraps of bread by the porch for the wild birds. He began talking to his horse again, not out loud, but with small gestures, the way lonely men do. He would sit by the fire at night, eyes fixed on the deer-hide cloth hanging above the mantel, the one with the children's handprints. It swayed slightly when the wind came through the cracks, as if alive, as if breathing. Then, one morning, they returned. The sound of hooves, not 100 this time. Only 2. He stepped out, hand near his belt knife, but not on it. He didn't need to draw. The woman rode toward him, her sons riding beside her, the younger holding tight to the saddle horn, the older sitting proud and still. They stopped a few yards from the porch. She dismounted first, calm, composed, the sunlight catching in her hair. The rancher felt his breath shorten, not from fear, but from something gentler and far more dangerous. He nodded once, slow. She nodded back. The boy smiled. She had brought gifts. A small bundle wrapped in soft hide, dried herbs, smoked meat, and a piece of cloth dyed with river clay. He took it with a quiet thank you. She didn't answer, just watched him, eyes deep as dusk. The boys ran to the corral, laughing, chasing the chickens like they owned the place. Their laughter cut through the silence like a song the land had been waiting to hear. The rancher found himself smiling, the kind of smile that felt strange after years of disuse. Over the next weeks, they came often. Sometimes the boys brought fish or wildflowers. Sometimes she brought nothing but silence. And still, that was enough. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. He would show her how to mend a fence. She would show him how to braid rope from dry grass. When they sat by the fire, the boys sleeping between them, the air felt thick with something unspoken. Not passion, not possession, but peace. It was a fragile peace, the kind that trembles in the wind, but never quite breaks. The rancher began to learn small words in her language. Simple things, water, sun, safe, thank you. She learned his name. He learned hers. Mara. It meant still river. He thought it suited her, quiet on the surface, deep beneath. Sometimes, when she spoke softly to her sons by the fire, he would close his eyes and just listen. He didn't know the words, but her voice painted pictures of campfires, stars, old songs about the land before fences. It reminded him of something he'd forgotten. That love doesn't always need to be loud to be real. But not everyone saw it that way. The town of Red Mesa was small, and small towns have ears sharper than knives. It wasn't long before the whispers began. They said the rancher had gone soft, that he'd traded his pride for a woman who should have been his enemy. The sheriff rode out one afternoon, hat low, dust on his coat, voice uneasy. He told the rancher, "You're crossing lines, friend. Lines that ain't meant to cross. They'll talk. Maybe worse." The rancher just looked at him, steady and tired. "I've buried too many lines in this dirt to fear more," he said. The sheriff sighed. "Just be careful. The men in town, they don't forgive what they don't understand." When the sheriff left, the rancher stood for a long time in the doorway, watching the horizon. The same wind that carried dust from the west now carried rumor, and rumor was a wildfire that never needed kindling. That night, when Mara came again, he told her. She listened without fear, her face calm, eyes burning softly in the firelight. Then she said, in broken English, "They afraid of love, of peace, always afraid." He looked at her then, really looked. The firelight made her seem almost carved from flame. Beautiful, yes, but also something sacred. He didn't reach for her. He only nodded because she was right. And somehow, that truth drew them closer than any touch could. The days grew hotter. The river ran slower. The boys played in the fields, laughing under the sun while their mother watched from the shade. Sometimes the rancher joined them, teaching them to ride, to whistle for the horses, to listen for the rattle of snakes in the tall grass. They began calling him Hala, a word she said meant still man. He liked that. He'd never been still before. But peace never lingers long in a place built on stolen land. One evening, Mara came alone. Her horse was tired, her face pale under the moonlight. She dismounted quietly and walked toward the porch, her movements slow, deliberate. He knew something was wrong before she spoke. "A man died," she said softly, her accent thick around the words. "One of ours, killed near the town. Shot. No reason." The air around them seemed to stop breathing. He looked toward the ridge, toward the lights of red, mesa flickering far away like dying stars. He knew what this meant. He could already hear the echoes of vengeance gathering on the horizon. Mara's voice trembled when she spoke again. "They will come. Many. They will burn." The rancher stepped closer, his voice calm. "And you?" She looked at him, her eyes full of the same storm he'd seen the first night she rode with 100 warriors. "I will stand between. Try to stop." But they listened to anger more than peace. He nodded. Then, softly, "Then I'll stand with you." She stared at him, not with disbelief, but with something far more painful, understanding. "You will die," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then maybe the land will remember me kindly." That night, they sat together by the fire. No words, no promises, just silence that spoke of everything they feared and everything they hoped. The boys slept nearby, unaware that the air outside was thick with change, the kind that breaks worlds apart. Mara leaned her head against his shoulder, just once, just long enough for him to feel her heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. It was the only time she ever touched him that way. The river murmured outside the cabin, carrying the reflection of the moon. Somewhere in that soft silver current, a story was being written, one of love that could never be owned, only remembered. Before dawn, she left. He watched her ride into the horizon, her figure fading with the mist. The boys' laughter still echoed faintly in the yard, though they were gone. He stood there until the sun rose, until light broke over the ridges and painted the land gold again. But gold in the wild west never lasted long. On the wind, faint and distant, came the sound of drums. Not the drums of dance, the drums of war. The days that followed were carved in quiet dread. The air felt different, too still, too heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Even the horses grew restless. Birds fled the fields before dusk. The river ran low, thick, dark, the color of secrets too deep to tell. The rancher could feel it in his bones. Something was coming. He tried to go about his work, fixing the gate, mending the fence, feeding the horses. But every sound, every shadow, carried a question. Would this be the last sunset he saw from his porch? He found himself touching the cloth above his fireplace more often now. The deer hide, the red handprints, the circles that meant life. He traced them with calloused fingers, as though the boys' laughter were still caught in the paint. And in the evenings, he'd stand by the river, staring at the horizon, listening for hooves. It happened on a Thursday. He was in town, trading salt and grain for flour and nails. The air was dry, the sun sharp enough to cut skin. That's when he heard the shouting. A gunshot cracked the quiet, then another. Men ran into the street. Someone screamed, "Indian scout's been shot." The rancher's heart turned to stone. He knew before they said it who the scout had been. One of hers. One of the tribe she had fought so hard to keep in peace. He dropped everything and ran to his horse. By the time he reached his ranch, the sky had already begun to change. Dark clouds rolling in from the west, thick and heavy like smoke. In the distance, he could see fire. Not the small, gentle kind of a campfire, but the kind that eats the horizon. He saddled his horse again, pain flaring through his old scars, and rode hard toward the ridge. The wind stung his face, the land blurring past in streaks of gold and gray. He rode like a man chasing a ghost. And at the river bend, the same place where this all began, he found them, a sea of riders, 100 strong, their war paint glistening under the stormlight, their torches burning even against the coming rain. At their center, on a black horse streaked with dust, sat Mara. She looked like a vision, part fury, part sorrow, all human. Her hair whipped in the wind, her eyes fixed on the town beyond the hills. When she saw him, she froze. For a long moment, neither spoke. The river roared between them, the same one that had taken her sons, the same one that had brought her here. He dismounted, walked toward her, slow and steady. Rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops that hit the earth like drumbeats. "Mara," he said softly. She didn't answer. Her warriors shifted around her, their eyes wary, hands gripping spears, rifles, anger. He stepped closer, stopping just short of the riverbank. "You don't have to do this," he said. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with heartbreak. She looked past him, toward the town, then back at him. "Too late," she whispered. "Blood already on wind." He shook his head. "Then let it end here." Lightning split the sky, white and wild. The horses reared. The storm broke open above them. Rain pouring like a flood sent to wash away the sins of men. She dismounted slowly, walked toward him until the river lapped at her boots. Her warriors murmured, uneasy. "You stand with them," she said, not accusing but wounded. "You are their skin, live on their land." He met her eyes. "I stand with life. Yours, there's mine, what's left of it." Something in her gaze softened. The rain fell harder, flattening her braids against her shoulders, washing away the pain on her face until only the woman remained. The woman who had lost too much and found something she didn't expect in the quiet of his firelight. Behind them, a shot cracked through the storm. It came from the ridge, a settler's rifle. The bullet screamed past her shoulder. The warriors roared in fury, raising their weapons. "Wait!" the rancher shouted, but his voice drowned under the thunder and rage. Another shot. This one hit the earth at his feet. He turned, saw movement in the brush. More settlers, drunk with fear and vengeance. The first arrow flew from the warrior's side, then another. Then the world broke into chaos. The night filled with screams, gunfire, rain, and the wild cry of horses. The rancher ran toward Mara as she shouted orders, trying to pull her people back, trying to stop the war that was already too loud to silence. He saw the flash of a rifle barrel on the ridge, and before he could think, he threw himself in front of her. The shot hit his shoulder, a burst of white pain, sharp and searing. He stumbled, fell into the mud. Mara caught him before he hit the ground, blood mixed with rainwater, turning the river red again. She shouted something to her warriors, and miraculously, they stopped. Her voice cut through the storm like lightning itself. "Enough," she screamed. "Enough." The battle died in echoes. The settlers froze, their guns heavy in their shaking hands. The warriors lowered their weapons, their eyes burning with grief and exhaustion. Mara cradled the rancher's head in her lap. He tried to speak, but she pressed her hand to his lips. "Shoo," she whispered. "Still river." He smiled faintly. He remembered. Her name, her meaning. Rain poured harder now, washing away the blood, the footprints, the anger. For a long moment, no one moved. Only the river did, rushing unstoppable, as if trying to erase what man had done in its shadow. When the storm passed, the world was quiet again. The settlers retreated first, faces pale with something like shame. Then, slowly, the warriors mounted their horses. One by one, they disappeared into the mist. Mara stayed. She tore strips from her cloak, pressed them to his wound, and whispered words he didn't know, but somehow understood. A prayer for healing, or forgiveness, or both. "You should go," he murmured. "They'll come back." She shook her head. Her eyes glimmered with tears and firelight. I go when river says go. They stayed that way until dawn. Two souls on the edge of two worlds, the river whispering between them. When the first light touched the horizon, she rose. Her sons appeared from the trees, frightened but alive. They ran to her, clinging to her arms. She looked at the rancher one last time, her face unreadable, but her eyes said everything. Thank you. I will remember. You are part of this land now. She left without a word, her horse's hooves fading into the sound of the river. Weeks passed. The rancher healed slowly. The bullet had missed his heart, but not by much. He moved carefully, speaking little, thinking too much. No one came from town to check on him. No one dared. They said the land near his ranch was haunted now, that strange lights flickered there at night, that you could hear drums carried by the wind even when the sky was clear. He didn't mind. He liked the quiet. Sometimes at sunset, he'd walk to the ridge and watch the horizon. And on some evenings, not all but enough, he'd see her, far away, just a figure on horseback, watching, then gone again, swallowed by distance and light. The cloth still hung above his fire. The handprints faded now. The red turned brown with time. He would touch it sometimes, and the world would feel small enough to hold in his palm. The river still flowed, wild and steady, and sometimes when the wind came from the west, he could swear it carried her voice, soft, steady, alive. He'd smile then, the kind of smile a man wears when he knows the story is done, but not over. The narrator's voice softens. Peace never lasts forever in the West, but neither does war. Sometimes, all it takes is one heart brave enough to listen, one soul quiet enough to see beyond the dust. The rancher saved 2 boys from drowning, and in return, their mother saved 100 men from themselves. That's how legends are born, not from gunfire, but from mercy. And as the final fire burns low, the voice turns to the listener. If this story touched your heart tonight, give it life, with a like, a comment, and a share. Tell me, from where in this wide, wild world are you watching under your own stretch of sky? Until next time, keep your heart steady and your spirit kind. This was Wild West Tales.